Hey, so I watched The Conjuring. It was the second time that I've seen The Conjuring. I believe I saw it when it came out in theaters with some friends, presumably. And I remember liking it, kind of like I remember enjoying it when I was watching it. Some horror movies I start and I can't even get into. This one, it definitely has atmosphere that you can get into. Um, So, if you haven't seen The Conjuring, what it's like is it focuses on the true story of Ed and Lorraine Warren. Well, the true story. They do this thing where they're basing it off of these ghost hunters slash paranormal investigators that apparently were a thing and wrote books in the 20th century, and so they're basing it off of their you know true events that happened, specifically a haunting of a Rhode Island home in this one, The Conjuring. Um, so what that leads to in The Conjuring is this sort of dual narrative where the first scene you actually start out with Ed and Lorraine, and they're dealing with like a totally different paranormal event than the one that actually takes is the point of the movie, The Conjuring. So, and then the other facet of the dual narrative is obviously focused on this family, what is their name? The Perrins. So the Perrins have just moved to this Rhode Island house, and they're finding it to be haunted, and eventually in the movie they seek out Ed and Lorraine for help, assistance in ridding their home of this haunting. So you have this dual narrative where you are looking at Ed and Lorraine's life. You find out they have a daughter. You find out I think that they teach at a school. It's implied that there are lecturers giving talks. I'm not sure if it's at one school or if it's like multiple schools, but this is like many scenes that you see. It takes up screen time. And then you also follow the Perrin family as they experience the events, the hauntings, and their household. And I definitely think The Conjuring's first mistake is having that dual narrative. I think that they were trying to set it up for a franchise where they could follow Ed and Lorraine around on their spooky adventures, like a Scooby Gang that's like more serious than a Scooby Gang. But I don't. First off, I don't like Patrick Wilson, the actor that plays Ed. Sorry, Patrick. It's his face. Apparently, he has won. No, I don't think he won. He was nominated for 2 Tony Awards, so he must have like a beautiful singing voice, but his acting doesn't do it for me. So he's a really hard main character to watch in these movies, and he's in Insidious also, actually, so that's a shame. But I just don't think that his face does a lot of the he doesn't. He kind of just looks slightly agitated and concerned all the time. It's not a medley of acting. I think actually the best acting we get from him in The Conjuring is his wife, Lorraine. I guess she's in a crawl space and she falls through the floor several stories, and the noise that his Patrick's character Ed makes is no, and it's like so funny. But that that was like the only real moment of emotion, and it was comedic. So I just don't think he's quite hitting it right. To be fair, I don't want to say he's like a bad actor. It might have been the writers. You never really know with this. Sometimes the lines, I'll talk about lines later that were just really bad lines that I'm not sure if he could have even delivered them well. What The Conjuring does well. I think that it has pretty good atmosphere. I think the soundtrack is good, and it has really phenomenal jump scares. Like, really good. There's a scene that if you've seen it, you totally know what I'm about to say. And the children are playing this game of, like, clap and hide and seek. Clap and seek. And it's in Marco Polo style. You clap and you use the audio to try and find, you're blindfolded, to try and find the people that you're seeking. So you, the mother is playing with her daughter at one point, and she hears and she goes into a room, and she's like, I think my daughter's in here, and she's like, clap, and there's this huge armoire. Out from the armoire, the doors slowly open, and out from the armoire come the hands, and they go. And it's scary. It's frightening, especially because, you know, the mother goes to the armoire, and she's like looking through the clothing, and she's like, there should be a child here. And from behind her, her daughter is like, Mommy, you're looking in the wrong place. Ah! And so you're like frightened with her, because that's, I think that, I don't know what you would call that trope. Distraction in the form of a familiar. Like, you think that you hear your mother's voice, but it's not your mother. You know, like, that kind of thing is spooky and is a thing that happens sometimes in horror movies, and I like it. I think it works. So the jump scares were super good. The clap scene is memorable. I feel like the timing between silence and action is pretty good in this movie. So they have the feel down, but they have the feel down in this movie, which will almost convince you it's a good movie. But the writing, in my opinion, is all over the place. Like, it's not that you can't follow it, it's that you have to jump hoops to make things up in your head to make the movie make sense. Like, it doesn't work as is. It should have had some work done. So I really think they should have dropped the first 6 minutes. And you're like, Chelsea, pray tell, what is in the first 6 minutes? The first 6 minutes are a scene in which Ed and Lorraine are investigating. You find out later, I think, that it's like movie footage that the class they teach is watching, but you're watching it like the audience, like the class. And so you see a scene in which there are some gals, some nurses from, I don't know, the 70s, the 80s maybe, and they're talking about the doll Annabelle, which, if you've seen Annabelle, is a creepy doll from the movie Annabelle. She's like the source of haunting, and they're like, oh, she's haunting us, and it's bad, and we feel threatened by her. Please help us. And, you know, Ed and Lorraine use this for their students to be like, this is what we do. This is what we do. But, like, it doesn't help the movie at all. I would actually say that the first 6 minutes here hinder the movie. I feel like the screenwriters were like, well, we should set up that Ed and Lorraine have had other cases so that we can make sequels. And I don't think that's necessary. I think you could just make a sequel if you felt like it. But the other problem is that specifically in the Annabelle scene where they're discussing how Ed Warren, he tells these three gals who are being haunted by this creepy doll, he says, well, the problem is that that's not actually the ghost of a girl that you've let inhabit the doll. It's actually like an otherworldly demonic presence, and it doesn't want to inhabit the doll, it wants to inhabit you. He says things like, that's that presence has never set foot in the mortal realm, and it wants, that's what it wants. So I guess you kind of, if you're watching that scene, you assume that that will be important later. You assume that they are world building, like, to a point where they're like, oh, that information will come back. But it kind of doesn't. It turns out that the thing they're fighting at the Perrin house is a totally different thing. So, you know how there are creatures that have rules, and you use those rules to fight or banish them. For example, vampires, you might use garlic or a stake to the heart, or even maybe a cross, holy water, that kind of thing. For werewolves, a silver bullet would work, presumably. People have said, I've heard. A Frankenstein is scared of fire. I don't know. There are certain rituals we have to keep away, like boogeymen, right? And so Ed Lorraine, when he's talking to these people, and you, the audience, when you're watching the movie, he sets up the Annabelle creature. He calls it, I believe, a demon. He says it is not a ghost. It's not like related to a deceased person. It's a different thing. And therefore, he says it has different rules than a ghost does. He's like, it wants to inhabit your body. And theoretically, you'd think it would have different ways to dispel it. I'm assuming it's just an exorcism because the whole movie is kind of Catholic themed, but I don't know if they go into it in this one. You'd have to watch Annabelle. But anyway, when you go to the Perrin family household, you find out, so at first you're watching this haunting and you're assuming it's that thing that Ed mentioned at the beginning of the movie. You're assuming that it is an otherworldly, demonic presence. But actually, it turns out that there was a specific woman who, it's the most hilarious story. She apparently sacrificed her newborn baby in front of the fireplace, and then like ran up a tree and pledged her love to Satan, and then jumped off and hung herself. And cursed people who tried to take her land before doing so. So that's absurd. But that's a different thing than a demonic presence that wants to specifically inhabit your body. Now we're dealing with a ghost woman who wants you off her land and is a ghost of a deceased person, which you would think would have different rules. But anyway, so this was the second time I watched The Conjuring. The first time I watched it, I kind of enjoyed the first half, and the second half with the exorcism bit, I was kind of bored. This time when I watched it, I was more confused because I think I'd forgotten the beginning with the 6 minutes where they're talking about Annabelle, and so I really went in thinking it was like a demon, but then they were like, actually, there's all these ghosts that are inhabiting the house, and I couldn't remember how, like, the story played out, but I was thinking, it would be really cool. So there's the woman who tried to sacrifice her child, and there was a boy who disappeared in the woods, and there was a woman who like committed suicide. There were like a bunch of different like dead people on this property, right? That were ghosts, and we were seeing them as the apparitions in the movie. So the ghosts were there. It was not a demon. It was ghosts. But they didn't, I felt they didn't properly tie together all the ghosts. And as I was thinking that, I was like, oh, it would be so cool if they made something like a ghost king, like a rat king, where the tails get all tied together and it forms this like eldritch being made of rats. If they made a ghost king, it would be like many ghosts that come together into like a Voltron of more powerful ghosts. And then there must be a new ritual to defeat the Ghost King. I got really excited about this idea. It's not what's in The Conjuring. That's not how the movie goes. But I really want a Ghost King movie. I might need to make that movie. Because I'm really into ritual solvings of rituals. Well, I say ritual, but it doesn't need to be like light a candle, say a prayer. Like, it doesn't need to be that specific. I would count blowing up the shark in Jaws as a ritual. It's a task you need to do to dispel the malevolent force of your movie. So I just like when people get kind of creative with rituals in movies. Like if they created this otherworldly demon and they were like, well, you gotta so in horror movies there's this trope that's frequently used, I think, where if you have a woman who looks like this as the main character, she'll generally seek out like maybe a woman of color or some person who's not a white blonde woman, someone who she thinks would be more knowledgeable about this sort of weird paranormal stuff that's happening in her life. In the movie, they wait because it has Chinese elements. You know, obviously she seeks out Chinese people to ask about the thing, but like, you know, if you were dealing with a movie with voodoo, maybe this character would seek out someone from the bayou, like that kind of thing. I don't think it's a good trope. It's just a thing that happens. You, if you're not Bella Swan typing it into Google, you are a white woman who goes to your neighbor who's of a different culture than you and says like, so what about those ghosts? So the weird thing about The Conjuring is that the person they seek for help is a white dude. He is Ed Warren. And so he's explaining these rituals to the family, and I think his cameraman is involved in this dialogue too, where it's the most basic exorcism stuff, where he's putting up crosses and he's like, the ghosts won't like the crosses because they're malevolent forces and this spits in their face. And it was the weirdest line in the whole movie, I think. The cameraman, I believe, says something along the lines of like garlic to a vampire? And I was like, how do you know that garlic defeats a vampire, but you don't know that a cross defeats a demon? Like, it's such a ubiquitous idea in our culture. Like, I mean, it's definitely a protective element in Catholicism, I think. It was a really big element in the movie The Exorcist. There have been so many Exorcist movies since then that play on that. It's a frequent totem that people carry around. Buffy the Vampire Slayer probably has crosses. I don't know. But it's just I think it's a known thing. Like, if you're in a world where demons are suddenly real, you're not gonna go get, like, bleach. You're gonna go get, like, holy water, or, like, a cross, or maybe a gun. It's America, I don't know. But anyway, so I thought the world building was kind of off the rails in this. And I didn't like the opening sequence, which I've already said in this, but it really felt like in the beginning of The Incredibles, they have sort of all those press releases about the superheroes. Um, and you get, yeah, you come to the understanding that there are superheroes in their world, and that's a normal, known thing. And so at the beginning of The Conjuring, when they have, it's not a press release, but when they have this video footage of Ed and Lorraine, like, solving crimes, ghost crimes, it's almost like they're trying to tell you that demons and ghosts, hauntings, whatever you want, are like a real and normal thing in their world, like in the cinematic universe of The Conjuring. Which it's a very common facet of the cinematic universe of The Conjuring. But what's weird is that you have all these demons running around. But the problem is that no one's getting their darn kids baptized. How do you protect them from demons? That's like a real line in the movie. So unfortunately, they have to get help from the church to get an exorcism for the demon / ghost / bad screenwriting. And Ed Lorraine, not Lorraine's his wife, Ed Warren says, it's a shame your kids aren't baptized. I don't think the church is going to want to help. He doesn't say that verbatim, but it's implied. And so they have to spend all this time gathering like audio-visual proof that the house is haunted. And it puts the entire family in danger. And it also, it puts the entire family in danger, and it ends up with the spoiler, the wife of the family becoming possessed by this demon ghost thing, and when the woman is possessed, she's like really trying to kill one of the daughters of the family. So it's like very dangerous for the family to delay this exorcism, but they do because the church has like a really terrible bureaucracy apparently, where demons are innocent until proven guilty, which is a strange choice to make. And so, basically at the very end, the church hasn't gotten back to them. The word has to come all the way from the Vatican. And they just haven't gotten back to them. So they, Ed Lorraine is like, I'll do the exorcism myself to save this woman's life. And it's like, bro, if you could have done that before, why didn't you do it, like 30 minutes ago? Like, I don't know. When I was watching the movie, I really just feel like the second half is wasting my time. It feels contrived for them to do an exorcism in which the guy who was there could have done it all along and he only had to believe in himself. And also the exorcism weirdly hinged on like whether the wife loved her family enough, which was so strange because they were doing like a juxtaposition of the woman who had slaughtered her child for Satan because she loved Satan versus this family woman who had become possessed by that woman, who apparently loves her 5 daughters. And so she remembers this day on the beach that she had with her girls, and that's what saves her from demonic possession. So, the universe was just super weird in that, like, baptizing your children and going to the beach, like, make everything better. So, yeah, weird choices all around. It just seemed like the ending came too simply. It wasn't clever. It wasn't like, there wasn't like a clever move that anyone made at the ending. It was just like, if we all believe in our own hearts, then we'll be fine and the demon will go away. And that's how it ended. So, so that's my review of The Conjuring. I don't think it's very good. It's, my verdict would be that the scares are decent enough to make you think it's a good horror movie, but it's secretly not. That's it.